5 years ago, citizens of Rutland County stepped up during Tropical Storm Irene and the days and weeks that followed. It was a storm that made towns within Rutland County islands isolated due to washout roads. Power was knocked out and emergency shelters filled up. The resiliency of our area and state in the aftermath of the storm was nothing short of extraordinary. Community members bypassed politics and helped rebuild roads using their own equipment. Young professionals formed a grassroots campaign to get necessities to areas cut off through restoring Rutland. A food train was created through the town of Chittenden to funnel supplies and food into cut-off towns. Today, we sit down with Mayor Louras to find out what the city of Rutland learned during Irene and the advancements made since.
What Tropical Storm Irene did was validated what we learned during the hurricane, which was those professional relationships with stakeholders, keeping the lines of communication open with the National Guard at all times, lines of communication open with Green Mountain Power, lines of communication open with the hospital, with the Vermont Emergency Management, so that when something happens, we aren't trying to call people and figure out who we need to talk to make things happen. Those relationships have been established and they're ongoing. We're always reaching out during both small events and during times where there are no storm events at all, just to talk to people and to maintain those relationships so that when the inevitable stuff hits the fan, we don't need to reestablish those connections.
Rutland's water system failed during the storm. Today, it's stronger than ever, and plans are made for its future to ensure power can stay on at the water treatment facility.
Rutland is very fortunate that as long as water can get to our reservoir, it's all gravity feed from the reservoir to every single resident in the city and to the hospital and to General Electric and all the commercial users as well. So we don't have to have a lot of power. There are no pumps up there. So it doesn't take a lot of energy to run the space. So what we're looking to do now is, just like we created that energy island at the high school for the emergency shelter, we also want to create an energy island at the water reservoir so that the small pumps that feed chlorine and fluoride into the system, as well as keeping the lights on and have the computers that run the facility, don't take a lot of power, and we want to create a small solar field up there. We're talking no more than probably half a dozen panels to run both the plant itself, which is a slow feed gravity sand filtration system. As I said, no pumps and not a lot of energy needs, as well as the engineer's house, where the folks live who can run the plant.
Our local utility was tested in the storm and rallied together to overcome hurdles and get the lights back on.
Every storm that hits provides some opportunity for learning. What we learned, I think, from Irene was we can do way more than we ever thought possible, in some cases with no roads. When the storm first hit, I think we were thinking this is going to take weeks to put everything back together because there's no roads, there's no bridges, how are we going to do it? And within a day we decided no matter what happened with roads and bridges, we were going to get the power back on to customers as quickly as we could. And we were able to return power to every customer who could take it within 5 days. In some cases where roads weren't put back in place for months. So I think it really changed the way we look at recovery. It really gave us the thought that no matter what we're facing, there's always a solution, and sometimes it may be limbing trees and using those as power poles for an intermediate period of time. It may be using bikes or motorcycles or horses or who knows what to get to places that are inaccessible by normal means. But it definitely gave us the thought process that we can always find a way to get things done even when it looks like it's impossible.
Outside of infrastructure, community members, many of whom had never met before, came together, gathering donations through a grassroots effort that came to be known as Restoring Rutland.
One of the greatest things that I saw personally during Tropical Storm Irene was Restoring Rutland, when it was a complete grassroots, ground-up effort, and because we in the city were so busy trying to deal with the flooding in the East Creek neighborhoods around Baxter and Cleveland Avenue, and especially we were trying to deal with rebuilding our city reservoir infrastructure, which was gone. You know, we didn't have the time, energy, resources to really put into the human element of helping people out. And that's what was the great thing about restoring Rutland, is you had a group of driven, passionate people who just stepped into the breach to say, we've identified a problem and we're going to fix it. And it was not top down, and it was just a wonderful thing to watch, frankly.
You know, I think Irene was a hallmark for the community in a lot of ways. It really brought people together. I met people as a result of Irene. I had never met Jim Sabatasso and a lot of other folks from Rutland Young Professionals, or what became Rutland Young Professionals. And I think that the storm in many ways brought people together in new ways. Certainly the community as a whole has really come a long way in the 5 years since then. Not necessarily because of the storm, but it certainly was the beginning of a lot of things.
The storm also reassured the city of Rutland it had made the correct call in moving the emergency shelter to the high school from the College of St. Joe's, that during Irene was impossible to access.
Wouldn't you know it, about 4 days before Tropical Storm Irene hit, we load tested the generator up there, and it worked. And then the flooding of East and Otter Creeks clearly put College of St. Joseph on an island. And so we are proved right that that was a bad place for an emergency shelter. It was completely cut off and flooded out itself.
Since Irene, improvements have been made to the high school site ahead of future storms.
And since that time, we've even built up the infrastructure even more at the high school, Stafford Tech, as an emergency shelter, where now on the city landfill, the dump right behind the high school, there is a massive solar power, energy plant, and all the arrays have battery storage under a Department of Energy grant, and will be tied into the high school in Stafford Tech as a microgrid, as an energy island, so that in the event anything happens in the future and we have the same type of event as we had during Irene, where the power grid is completely knocked out, our emergency shelter at the high school in Stafford Tech will be standalone, operating by itself on solar power.
Our community lost two important men during Irene. Today, 5 years later, that loss hasn't lessened in the hearts of those who knew Mike and Michael Garofano the best.
There's not a week goes by where we in City Hall don't think of Mike Garofano and his adult son Michael, who he lost during Irene, and that loss is still with us 5 years later, and we're clearly not going to be able to recover from that.